The Korean Mafia boss lost everything. Unaware, a black accountant opened his file. His suitcase slammed hard against the wet pavement. Clothes burst out of it, spreading across the rain-soaked ground as another box followed, crashing open beside it. A pair of polished black shoes rolled out and stopped just inches from the gutter, now filled with dirty water. Throw everything out. He's done here. The eviction crew didn't even look at him. Gyu-min stood a few steps away, unmoving, his eyes fixed on what used to be his life. A week ago, men would have bowed their heads before speaking to him. Now, strangers handled his belongings like trash. One of the workers kicked a framed photo aside. The glass shattered. Gyu-min didn't react. A small crowd had gathered, whispering. Some recognized him. Most pretended not to. A man in a suit walked past, paused for half a second, then continued like nothing mattered. That man used to call him boss. Now he couldn't even meet his eyes. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. Within minutes, everything was soaked, his clothes, the boxes, the last pieces of a fallen empire. "Hey," one of the workers muttered, pointing. "You can't stay here after we're done." Gyu-min didn't answer. What was there to say? The door behind them slammed shut. Locked. Final. Just like that, it was over. No farewell. No loyalty. No fight. Only silence. Hours passed, and the street grew quieter. The rain didn't stop. It soaked through his shirt, clung to his skin, but he didn't move. He simply lowered himself slowly onto the pavement, sitting beside what remained of his belongings. For the first time in years, Gyu-min had nowhere to go. No crew, no allies, no enemies even. Because a man with nothing wasn't worth opposing. Night fell, and the city lights came alive. Neon reflections shimmered in puddles around him, turning the cold street into something almost beautiful. But he didn't see it. His stomach tightened. Hunger. He ignored it. A stray dog approached, sniffed one of the torn bags, then looked at him. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Even you think I'm nothing now?" Gyu-min muttered under his breath. The dog walked away. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but it faded before it could form. By the next morning, most of his things were gone. Some taken, some destroyed, some simply carried away by the rain. Gyu-min stood up slowly, his movement stiff, like his body hadn't decided if it still belonged to him. He picked up what little remained, an old jacket, damp and heavy, and walked. No direction, no destination, just movement. Days passed like that. He learned which alleys stayed dry longest when it rained, which shops threw out food late at night, which streets were quieter, where no one would chase him away. He stopped speaking. There was no one to speak to. Sometimes people looked at him, really looked, and there was confusion in their eyes. Like they felt something was off, but couldn't place it. Because even in tattered clothes, Gyu-min didn't move like a broken man. He moved like someone who had simply fallen. One evening, as the sky darkened again and rain threatened to return, Gyu-min found himself sitting near a small grocery store. The corner between two buildings offered slight shelter, enough to keep him from being completely drenched. He sat there, knees slightly drawn in, arms resting loosely, eyes distant. The store door opened. A woman stepped out, holding a small paper bag. She paused for a second, adjusting her grip, then started walking toward her car. Halfway there, she slowed down. Her eyes shifted. She had seen him. Natasha stood still, just for a moment, watching. There was something about him that didn't match. The clothes were worn, his hair slightly unkempt, his face tired, but his posture, even seated on the cold ground, didn't belong there. What is a man like that doing here, she thought. She hesitated, then turned. Each step toward him felt deliberate. Gyu-min noticed her shadow before he looked up. When he did, his expression didn't change. Blank. Guarded. Tired. She stopped a few feet away. "Hey," she said gently. No response. "What are you doing out here?" Silence. Gyu-min looked away, dismissing her presence entirely. Natasha frowned slightly, not offended, just curious. She glanced at the bag in her hand, then back at him. Have you eaten? Still nothing. She reached into the bag, pulled out a loaf of bread, and extended it toward him. Take it. Gyumin's jaw tightened slightly. I don't need it, he said, his voice low, rough from disuse. Natasha raised an eyebrow. You don't look like someone who can afford to say that. His eyes flickered toward her, sharp for a brief second. Go away. There was no anger in his tone, just distance. Natasha studied him for another moment, then slowly crouched down, placing the bread beside him on the dry patch of ground. Suit yourself, she said calmly, standing back up. She didn't wait for a response this time. She turned and walked to her car. Gyumin didn't touch the bread. Not immediately. Minutes passed. The rain started again, light droplets tapping against the pavement. He stared at it. His stomach twisted. His pride held. For a while. Then, slowly he reached out. Picked it up. Took a bite. And for the first time in days, he ate something that wasn't thrown away. Across the street, through her rear-view mirror, Natasha watched quietly. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. Something about that moment stayed with her. And she knew this wasn't the last time she would see him. If you're already feeling the weight of this story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Would you have walked past him or stopped like Natasha did? The next evening, the rain returned before the sun could fully disappear. Gyumin was in the same corner. Same position. Same silence. Same distant eyes. Only difference, this time, the bread was gone. He had eaten all of it. The grocery store door opened again. Natasha stepped out a little slower than the day before. Her eyes moved almost immediately to the corner, and there he was. Still there. Still alone. Still pretending the world didn't exist. She stood under the store's awning for a few seconds, watching him as the rain picked up. People rushed past, shielding themselves, hurrying home. No one stopped. No one ever stopped, except her. She let out a quiet breath and walked toward him again. This time, he noticed her before she got too close. His eyes lifted slightly, not surprised, just aware. You came back, he said flatly. Natasha tilted her head. You're still here. That's not an answer. She shrugged lightly. Maybe I don't like unanswered questions. He looked away again, uninterested. Rain tapped harder now, bouncing off the pavement, creeping closer to where he sat. Natasha stepped closer, ignoring the water soaking into her shoes. Did you eat the bread? She asked. A pause. Yes. Good. Silence settled again, but this one felt different. Less empty. More waiting. Natasha crouched down in front of him, her movements calm but intentional. What's your name? She asked. He didn't respond. She sighed softly. All right. We'll skip that for now. Another pause. Then she asked the question that mattered. Do you have anyone? Gyumin's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, just slightly. No. Family? No. Friends? He let out a faint breath, almost bitter. No. Natasha studied him carefully, as if measuring something invisible. You're not from the street, she said quietly. His gaze snapped back to her for a brief second. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, she replied. You sit like someone who's used to being respected. That hit. Not visibly. But it landed. Gyumin looked away again, jaw tightening. People lose things, he muttered. That's all. Everything, she asked. He didn't answer. The rain grew heavier now, soaking both of them completely. Natasha stood up slowly, brushing her hands together. Come with me, she said. Gyumin didn't move. No. It wasn't a question. I said no. Natasha crossed her arms slightly, looking down at him. Then what's your plan? She asked. Sit here until you disappear? That's not your concern. You're right, she said calmly. It's not. That made him look up again. But I'm making it my concern, she added. Gyumin stared at her, searching for something: pity, arrogance, hidden intention. He found none. Just certainty. I don't need help, he said firmly. Natasha nodded once. That's obvious. A brief silence. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. But you're taking it anyway. Something in her tone wasn't forceful, but it wasn't soft either. It was final. The kind of tone people didn't argue with. Gyumin held her gaze for a few seconds longer than before. Rain poured around them, louder now, almost drowning out everything else. Then she asked again, more quietly this time. Do you have anywhere to go tonight? He hesitated, just for a second.
No.
That was it. Natasha turned and started walking toward her car. Then come, she said over her shoulder. She didn't check if he followed. Didn't wait. Didn't convince. Just walked. Gyumin stayed seated. His eyes followed her figure as she moved through the rain, unlocking her car, opening the door. She paused for a moment but didn't turn around. He looked down at his hands.
Rough. Dirty.
Empty. A man who once controlled everything, now struggling to accept a ride. His pride whispered, stay. His reality answered, move. Slowly he stood up. His body felt heavier than it should, like every step carried something unseen. He walked toward the car. Each step felt like a decision he couldn't undo. When he reached the passenger side, he stopped for a second. Natasha finally glanced at him. No smile, no judgment, just a simple look that said, make your choice. Gyumin opened the door, sat down, closed it. The sound echoed louder than it should have. For the first time in days, he was under a roof again. Inside the car, the silence was thick. The engine started. They pulled away from the curb. Streetlights blurred past them as rain streaked across the windshield. Natasha kept her eyes on the road. So, she said after a while, you're coming home with me. Gyumin leaned his head back slightly, staring forward. For now. That's fine, she replied. Another pause. Then she added, we'll figure the rest out later. He didn't respond, but this time he didn't resist either. As the car moved deeper into the city, something shifted quietly inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. And Natasha, she noticed. If you're starting to see where this is going, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. Would you have taken that step if you were in his position? The apartment door clicked open, and warm light spilled into the hallway. Gyumin stepped in slowly.
He didn't speak.
Didn't look around too much either, but his eyes caught everything. Clean floors, soft lighting, a quiet kind of order that felt stable. Take off your shoes, Natasha said, already setting her keys aside. He hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. The door closed behind him, and just like that, the noise of the outside world disappeared. No rain, no passing cars, no voices, just silence. Bathrooms there, Natasha pointed. You should shower first. Gyumin looked down at himself, his damp clothes clinging to his skin, the faint smell of the street still on him.
All right.
She walked ahead of him briefly, opening a small cabinet. I'll get you something to wear. It won't be perfect, but it's clean. He didn't respond, just moved toward the bathroom. The moment the door shut behind him, he leaned both hands against the sink. His reflection stared back at him. For the first time in days, he really looked. Tired eyes, slight stubble, a face that still carried traces of authority, but buried under exhaustion. Pathetic, he muttered under his breath. The water ran.
Hot.
Steam slowly filled the room. And as it poured over him, something invisible began to wash away, not everything, but enough to feel the difference. Minutes later, he stepped out. Natasha had left folded clothes neatly on the counter. Simple. Comfortable. He put them on without a word. When he came out, she was in the kitchen area, unpacking a small bag. There's food if you want, she said without turning. It's not great, but it's something. Gyumin sat down quietly. She placed a plate in front of him,
He stared at it.
then took a bite.
A pause.
Another bite. Natasha turned slightly, watching his reaction. It's bad, isn't it? She asked. Gyumin didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. She blinked, then let out a short laugh.
Wow.
Straight to the point. You asked. Fair enough. They ate in silence after that.
Not awkward.
Just unfamiliar. Two strangers sharing space neither of them expected. After a while, Natasha stood up, stretching lightly. You can take the couch, she said. I'll get you a blanket. Gyumin nodded once. Thank you. It was the first time he said it. Natasha paused for a brief second, then continued walking without making a big deal out of it. Don't mention it. That night, Gyumin lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The quiet felt different here. Not empty. Just calm. He should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, his body relaxed before he could stop it. And within minutes, he fell asleep. The next few days passed slowly. Gyumin spoke little. Natasha didn't push. She went to work every morning, leaving him alone in the apartment. He never touched anything he didn't need to. Never asked questions. Never offered explanations. But he watched, observed, learned her routine. One evening, Natasha returned home, dropping her bag by the door with a tired sigh. I'm back, she said out of habit. No response. She stepped further in and froze. The smell hit her first.
Warm. Rich.
Inviting. Her eyes moved to the table.
Set. Properly.
And then to the kitchen. Gyumin stood there plating food. She blinked. What is this? He didn't turn immediately. Dinner. You cooked. Yes. She walked closer, almost cautious. You know how to cook? He glanced at her briefly. I went to culinary school. Natasha raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. People are more than one thing, he replied calmly. She sat down slowly, still processing. Okay, let's see. She picked up her fork, took a bite.
Paused.
Her eyes widened slightly. Wait. Another bite. Then another. This is actually good. Gyumin said nothing, just continued serving the rest. No, she said, pointing slightly at the plate. This is really good. A faint, almost invisible shift touched his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. That night, something changed. The silence between them wasn't just neutral anymore. It had weight, comfort. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Natasha worked. Gyumin cooked. Simple, unspoken, but effective. One evening, as they sat across from each other again, Natasha leaned back slightly, studying him. You've been here for a while now, she said. He looked up briefly. Yes. You still not going to tell me your name? A pause. Then finally, Gyumin. She nodded slowly. Gyumin. The name sat there for a second. Then she smiled lightly. I'm Natasha. Though I guess you figured that out already. I did. Silence again. But this time it wasn't empty. Natasha rested her chin lightly on her hand. You know, she said, you don't act like someone who lost everything. Gyumin met her gaze. What does that look like? She shrugged. Broken. Angry. Desperate. And I don't look like that? No, she said simply. You look like someone who's waiting. That lingered. Gyumin didn't respond immediately, but something in his eyes shifted again. Because deep down, she wasn't wrong. If this story is starting to pull you in, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. What do you think Gyumin is really waiting for? The night felt quieter than usual. Not because the city had slowed down, but because something unspoken was building between them. Gyumin stood by the kitchen counter, rinsing a plate, his movements steady, controlled. Natasha sat at the table, her laptop open, fingers resting on the keyboard but not moving. Her eyes weren't on the screen. They were on him. You used to have money, she said suddenly. Gyumin didn't turn. That's an assumption, he replied calmly. It's an observation. Silence. Water continued running for a few seconds before he shut it off. You don't hesitate around expensive things, she continued. You don't look impressed. You look familiar. Gyumin dried his hands slowly. People notice strange things, he said. I'm an accountant, she replied. I notice patterns. That made him glance at her briefly. And what pattern did you find in me? Natasha leaned back slightly. That you lost more than just a place to stay.
A pause.
Then she added, quieter this time. You lost control. That landed. Gyumin's jaw tightened just slightly, but he didn't deny it. Maybe, he said. Natasha didn't push further. She simply nodded and turned back to her laptop. But her fingers still didn't move, because something had already started forming in her mind. Later that night, after Gyumin had gone to rest, Natasha remained awake. Her screen now filled with numbers, names, records. She wasn't digging blindly. She was connecting details. The way he carried himself, the discipline, the silence. Men like that didn't just lose everything. They were pushed. Her fingers moved faster now. Searches turned into cross-references. Cross-references turned into access points. And then, she found it. Her eyes narrowed slightly as lines of financial records filled the screen. Large transactions, multiple accounts, sudden shifts, and then a name. She froze for a second. Gyumin. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The data didn't lie. This wasn't just any man. This was a man who once controlled millions. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen. But what caught her attention wasn't just the wealth. It was how it disappeared. Not through loss. Not through bad decisions. But through transfers. Hidden. Layered. Redirected. Her expression changed. This wasn't a collapse, she muttered. This was a setup. The realization hit fully now.
His crew.
The same people who should have protected him. They had emptied everything. Systematically.
Cleanly.
She leaned back slowly, staring at the screen. They betrayed him. The room felt heavier. Because now everything made sense. The silence. The distance. The refusal to talk. Gyumin didn't lose his empire. It was taken from him. Natasha closed the laptop halfway, her thoughts racing. Should she tell him? Would he even care? Would it pull him back into something he was clearly trying to leave behind? She looked toward the hallway. His door was closed. Quiet. Still. For a moment, she considered leaving it alone, letting him live this new life. Peaceful. Simple. But then she remembered his eyes. That look she couldn't ignore. You look like someone who's waiting. She exhaled slowly. No, she whispered to herself. He deserves to know. The next evening, the air between them felt different. Not tense, but deliberate. Gyumin noticed it immediately. You're thinking about something, he said, setting a plate down. Natasha didn't respond right away. She closed her laptop gently. I found something, she said. Gyumin's movements paused. Just for a second. Then continued. That's so. Natasha looked directly at him now. Your money wasn't lost. That made him stop.
Completely.
Silence filled the room. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice lower now. I'm talking about your accounts, she said. Your assets. They didn't disappear. He turned slowly to face her. They were moved. A long pause. Gyumin's eyes locked onto hers, searching. Explain. Natasha stood up, walking a few steps closer. Multiple transfers. Hidden across different channels. Done carefully over time. Her voice stayed calm, but firm. That doesn't happen by accident. Gyumin's expression darkened slightly. Say what you're trying to say. Natasha held his gaze. You were betrayed. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Gyumin let out a quiet breath, almost like a dry laugh. No. Natasha frowned slightly. I've seen the records. No, he repeated, firmer this time. His eyes shifted away, his posture tightening. I walked away, he said. That's all. That's not what the data shows. I don't care what it shows. That was the first time his voice carried any real edge. Not anger, but resistance. Natasha didn't back down. They took everything from you. And I let them, he replied immediately. Silence. That wasn't denial. That was something deeper. Something heavier. Natasha studied him carefully now. You're not even angry? She asked. Gyumin looked at her again. This time, there was something clear in his eyes. Not rage. Not pain. Just exhaustion. I'm done, he said quietly. That answer wasn't what she expected, but it was real. And for a moment, she didn't know what to say. Because this wasn't the man seeking revenge. This was a man who had already let go. But still, she took a step closer. You may be done, she said softly, but that doesn't mean they get to keep what's yours. That lingered. Gyumin didn't respond immediately, but something inside him shifted. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. And Natasha saw it. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is about to change. Go ahead, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, should Gyumin take back what was stolen or leave it all behind? The morning felt different. Not outside. Inside. Gyumin stood by the window, staring at the city below. Cars moved like nothing had ever changed. People rushed to work. Life continued without pause. But for him, something had already shifted. Behind him, Natasha closed her laptop. You didn't sleep, she said. He didn't turn. I did. A pause. You didn't, she replied softly. Silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was heavy with thought. After a moment, Gyumin finally spoke. Show me. Natasha looked up slightly. What? The records, he said. Show me everything. That was the first real request he had made since arriving. Natasha didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. She simply nodded. Okay. The next few days were quiet, but purposeful. Natasha laid everything out carefully. Transactions. Names. Movements of money that didn't belong to chance. Each detail built a picture neither of them could ignore anymore. Gyumin sat through it all in silence. No interruptions. No denial. Just observation. And with each passing hour, something inside him hardened again. Not into anger. Into clarity. They didn't just take money, Natasha said at one point. They erased your position. Gyumin finally looked at her. How clean is it? He asked. Natasha hesitated slightly. Clean enough that most people would never find it. A faint pause. But not clean enough for me. That earned the first real silence between them that felt mutual. Later that night, Gyumin sat alone on the balcony. The city stretched endlessly before him. Natasha joined him quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed him one. He took it. Neither spoke immediately. Then Gyumin said, almost to himself, I could take everything back. Natasha didn't answer right away. Then she said carefully, Yes, you could. Another pause. And destroy them, he added. Yes. He looked down at the city again. For a long time. Then, No, he said. Natasha glanced at him. He continued, voice steady. They already destroyed themselves when they did it. Silence. Not confusion. Understanding. Natasha nodded slowly. So what will you do? Gyumin took a slow breath. For the first time, there was no weight in it. Just decision. I won't go back, he said. Natasha stayed quiet, listening. I spent years building power I didn't even question, he continued, and lost it in a way I never saw coming. He looked at his hands. Now I know what it costs. Natasha's voice softened. And Gyumin looked at her. This time, his expression wasn't empty. It was settled. I'll build something else. The next months passed in motion. Not chaos. Direction. Natasha helped recover what remained of his assets. Not for revenge, but for closure. Everything was handled legally, quietly, without noise. And Gyumin never once stepped back into the world he left behind. Instead, he did something no one expected. He opened a restaurant. Small at first. Simple. No name that carried weight. No symbols of power. Just food. Real food. The kind he used to cook when no one was watching. Natasha visited often. At first as support. Then as habit. Then as something neither of them spoke about too directly. One evening, she sat at the counter watching him work. "You really did it," she said. Gyumin didn't look up from the stove. "I'm still doing it." She smiled slightly. "You're different." He paused briefly. "No," he said quietly. "I'm just finally not pretending." A small silence followed. Then Natasha said, "You know, I thought I was helping you when I brought you home." Gyumin finally looked at her. "You were." She shook her head slightly. "I think you were helping me too." That lingered, because it was true in a way neither of them fully expected. Time moved forward. The restaurant grew, not into an empire, but into something steady.
Real.
People came for food, stayed for atmosphere, never knowing who he used to be, and he never told them. One evening, after closing, Gyumin stood outside the restaurant. Natasha joined him. The street was calm. No rain. Just city lights. She looked at him. "So this is it?" He nodded. "This is it."
A pause.
Then she asked quietly, "Do you regret it?"
He thought about it.
Not long. Just enough.
No.
Because for the first time in years, he wasn't surviving. He was living. Sometimes life doesn't take things from you just to punish you. Sometimes it removes what you were never meant to keep, so you can become someone you were meant to be. Power can be built and destroyed, but peace has to be chosen. And the hardest battles are not about getting everything back. They're about deciding what you no longer need. If this story stayed with you till the end, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And in the comments, tell me, if you were Gyumin, would you rebuild your empire or walk away from it completely?